Hi, I am so excited to see you all and to welcome you to our Justice and Joy webinar on centering Indigenous and traditional wisdom in healing practices. We are thrilled that we have two amazing experts and just all around wonderful human beings, Dr. Jill Fish and Dr. Shelley Harrell, who will be educating ourselves on this. Just a little bit first about the Justice and Joy Initiative. This is part of the Division 17 initiative. It will focus on three particular months: November, February, April, and then we'll have a Joy Summit right before APA in August. And November, we're talking about healing. And it's so important that we focus and center healing, especially since there is so much pain that is going on around us and in this world, that it's important to sit and reflect on what personal and collective healing is. And we've got several folks that are helping us think through that. Dr. Della Mosley kicked us off with talking about Healing Healers Heal with her presentation last week. We'll continue this with a conversation about, again, centering Indigenous and traditional wisdom in healing practices. We have a healing offering that is on the Division 17 YouTube page that has a resource that goes with that. At the end of the month, on November 30th, we'll be having a book discussion on the book by Robin Walmer, Braiding Sweetgrass, which focus on Indigenous wisdoms. Find out more about what we're doing at APA Division 17 on social media. Also, we have our students doing wonderful things. They had an IG conversation on collective sisterhood as healing. So we're really excited about this. In November, we'll take up questions about justice and how is justice connected to healing, and what is justice and components of that. And in April, we'll take up questions of joy and healing and how we practice joy as to heal, and how the practice of joy is healing. I wanted just to first talk about folks who are in for continuing education credits, the CE credits. We are offering 1.5 credit for free. We're really excited to be able to do that. And I want to be clear, in order to get your CE credits, it's important that you stay for the entire time. And there's actually like a timestamp that we get with our report. So be sure, after that, you will receive an email, probably from Dr. Joseph Hammer, and he'll tell you a bit about how to claim your CE credits. So be sure to stay on, be involved. We encourage discussion in the chat and Q&A. So let me go ahead, without further ado, let me go ahead and introduce our speakers. Dr. Jill Fish is a member of the Tuscarora Nation. And sorry if can you help me, Jill? I should have asked you beforehand.
I will, Helen. That's
Thank
okay. Tuscarora Nation of the Haudenosaunee Confederacy.
Thank you so much. I appreciate that, Dr. Fish. And she's an assistant professor of psychology at the Macalester College, and she's a licensed psychologist. She earned her degree in counseling psychology from the University of Minnesota just a couple of years ago in 2020. And she completed postdoctoral fellowships in Minneapolis as well. And she does interdisciplinary work. And if you haven't looked at her research, y'all need to look at her research. It seems like every month she's coming up with something really interesting and pushing the envelope of how we think about things. But her interdisciplinary work focuses on promoting Native American and Indigenous peoples' well-being across the lifespan. She's got she's broadly interested in how Native peoples use their histories and cultures to overcome oppression and to support their healthy functioning. If you haven't taken a look at her origin natives, and help me again, Dr. Fish, how do you pronounce it? I see that in writing, but I always feel like I'm not pronouncing it correctly. So if you can help me out, I really would appreciate that.
Yes, Dr. Neville, it's originatives. It comes from the word originate, and that we are being originative and creating our own stories.
Thank you, Originatives. And it's for those folks who haven't seen it, it's a digital, it does digital media. They have these beautiful, powerful stories of people telling their lives, telling about their lives and stories of healing, stories of joy, stories. Some stories are painful, some stories are of resilience. And it really gives voice to the experience of folks who have been marginalized in mainstream society. And it really is designed to help us challenge these dominant narratives and what it means to be Native. So make sure you check that out. And Dr. Fish will be talking to us today on becoming an ancestor. And I am also thrilled to introduce Dr. Shelley Harrell, who I feel is like a sister sojourn in this. And I've been really fortunate to have an opportunity to get to know her much better over the past couple of years. She's a full professor at Pepperdine University's Graduate School of Education and Psychology, and she directs their Culture, Wisdom, and Resilience Lab. Her early research focused on multidimensional conceptualization and measurement of racism-related stress. And most people who study racism-related stress know Dr. Hurl's work in that way. Many of us have used her scale. I've been doing some research, and it seems like that's one of the most popular scales in conceptualization of racism-related stress. So thank you for that gift that you have provided us. More broadly, though, her work focuses on cultural and social political dimensions of suffering and healing in the context of racial stress and trauma, with an emphasis on mind, body, and contemplative practices. She's got a soulfulness approach, and she also has a soulfulness center. And so if you haven't checked out her soulfulness center, I definitely point you out to that. She has many beautiful community offerings and coaching. She's got a community meditation that I know that I have benefited from. And so her most recent endeavor, though, in terms of research, is on the development of Sankofa theory in practice, which is a comprehensive African-centered theory that centers reconnection and interconnections as the core processes to heal the many harms of disconnection and coloniality. And oh my gosh, this is the time that we need this conversation. And that's what we'll be hearing her chat about. And she's also a practicing psychotherapist, and she's served as consultants to a lot of different educational units, social service, healthcare, professional organizations. So, and she'll be sharing with us her Sankofa theory and practice today. So welcome, Dr. Fish and Dr. Harrell. Dr. Fish will first present, and then we will turn it over to Dr. Harrell. Each person will have about 30 minutes to present, and then we will be able to engage in questions with you as the participants. So thanks again, and take it away, Dr. Fish.
Thank you for that generous introduction, Dr. Neville. I feel very honored to be here today and to be presenting alongside Dr. Harrell. It just feels, I feel very nervous, but I'm very happy to be here. I just feel very honored to participate in this conversation. So I tend to be a little wordy, so I'm going to get started because I don't want to go over my 30-minute mark. Today I'm talking about I'm becoming a future ancestor. So Chwent Eskenahet, everyone. I'm happy to be here. I'm a lineal descendant of the Tuscarora Nation of the Haudenosaunee Confederacy, which was where I was born and raised outside of Niagara Falls, New York. My father is an enrolled member and was born for the Beaver Clan. Chwent Eskenahet is a Skaduda word that is much more than a greeting, but that's what I typically use it for. It means I hope that your spirit is well. I speak my language so that my ancestors can hear me. And that's what I want to talk with you all about today. Carl Rogers' major work centered on becoming a person, and I'm really concerned with becoming a future ancestor. Pictured here is one of my ancestors, Clara Miller, my great-great-grandmother. Clara entered Carlisle Industrial Indian School in 1897, which was the flagship Indian boarding school in the United States and was located in Carlisle, Pennsylvania. The founder of Carlisle Indian School was infamously quoted saying that we must kill the Indian and save the man. These were people and places who thought that they could beat our culture, things like our language, out of us. My great-great-grandma Clara's story goes far beyond Carlisle, and it continues here with me today, right now. Not only do I speak my language so that my ancestors can hear me, I speak it so that my ancestors, past and future, can heal, can heal and feel whole, knowing that things that were thought to have been taken from us have actually remained all along. Clara graduated in 1902 and returned home to Tuscarora. She wrote to Carlisle School after 5 years, stating that she had a lovely home and a lovely family that were her whole heart, and that she hoped to raise her children with strong values and morals. And it's very similar to things I'm grappling with myself now as a mother. Despite being born more than a century apart and never physically meeting, I can say that I know my great-great-grandmother Clara and that she is one of my greatest ancestors. So today I want to talk about leveraging our ancestral knowledge and kinship networks to create a world that people we will actually never physically meet will thrive in. And much of my thinking around this topic comes from my own work with my ancestors, their stories, and their lives. This is another one of my greatest ancestors, my great-grandmother, Lillian Henry, who also attended Carlisle Indian School from 1912 to 1918. She similarly came home to Tuscarora afterwards. My own grandparents, Clara and Larry Fish, who I grew up next door to, are my most recent ancestors after journeying on to Sky World in more recent years. My grandma and grandpa did not attend boarding schools, but were direct descendants of those who did. I'm incredibly honored to have been raised on the land of my ancestors and within a family that was not described in terms of nuclear or extended kinship, but simply as relatives. And this sort of long-term forward thinking is what Maori scholar Daniel Hikora refers to as a mindset. And this ancestor mindset has been present in Native American and Indigenous communities for generations. Among Indigenous peoples in the US, it's often referred to as a seventh generation thinking or a seventh generation philosophy. I call it the seventh generation philosophy specifically. But this philosophy captures the idea that we as Indigenous peoples are really moving through the world with the next 7 generations of Earth in mind. Our actions in the present moment will affect the Earth and all of its inhabitants for years to come, for better or for worse. And I want to make a case for how we can be a part of making it better. More recently, with a group of Indigenous psychologists and scholars, we recently wrote about the implications of adopting the 7th generation philosophy for psychology. This is a quote from educator, writer, and artist Rick Hill, who is of the Tuscarora Nation Beaver Clan. He says, "We're connected to the first Indians who walked on this earth, the very first ones, however long ago that was. But we're also connected to those Indians who aren't even born yet, who are going to walk this earth. And our job in the middle is to bridge that gap. You take the inheritance from the past, you add to it your ideas and your thinking, and you bundle it up and shoot it to the future." Activating an ancestor mindset at its most basic level invites us to really question how what we're doing is going to impact the next several generations. But it also invites us to go beyond that and to ask, how will we continue to make a meaningful impact on this world when we no longer have a physical body, but are simply a mental and spiritual representation and connection to those who do? Again, the 7th generation philosophy isn't new among Native American peoples. Native peoples have been being good ancestors since time immemorial, and especially since the onset of the settler colonization of the Americas. The combination of violent land grabs, genocide, coercive biocultural assimilation, and the institution of oppressive policies and procedures forever changed Indigenous worlds and continues to leave a mark on Indigenous communities through historical trauma. Which Maria Yellowhorse Braveheart describes as the cumulative emotional and psychological wounding across generations, including one's own lifespan. However, Native peoples have remained stewards of the land, culture, and community despite all of this. Ancestors spoke our languages and facilitated our ceremonies, all in secret, in order to keep a cultural blueprint intact for subsequent generations to really nurture and to be able to flourish. So I highlight this because I think when we're talking about joy, we have to talk about this dialectic, these two things that can be true at the same time. There has to be an acknowledgement of that. Because our connections to people, ancestors, places, and time, it is traumatic, and trauma can be found here, but so can healing. And that's what I really want to leverage in my work with Native American and Indigenous peoples, both in research, but also in practice. As someone so succinctly and eloquently shared in a quote from an elder on social media, if trauma is intergenerational, then so is healing. And being a future ancestor means that we are cognizant that we play a very active role in history. Because as Maria Yellowhorse Braveheart also says, everything up until a minute ago is history. So the choices we're making right here and right now, your choice to be here and to listen to this, how we choose to live and spend our time is laying the foundation for the society that our future ancestors will live in, while also having the potential to be a story or a memory that will be accessed by a relative down the line about how they should live a good life. And our relatives include much more than humans. I like to invoke the word relatives for many different things, because when we're related to everything, it also changes how we live. So knowing that I will be someone's ancestor one day changes how I live, but also knowing right here, right now, that I am relatives to this really diverse and multifaceted kinship network, that also changes how I live. We have really vast relational networks that include the environment all around us. So how do we be good ancestors to our future human relatives, but how do we also be good ancestors to those who are currently living beside us, but have been here long before us and will be here long after us? So the trees, rocks, water, animals, the earth, all of Earth's ecosystem, things that are currently at risk and undergoing their own massive change and trauma as a result of the climate crisis and our lack of relationship with the ecosystem. These are things that being a future ancestor means it entails that we have to heal our relationship with all these relatives and think about their existence for the next 7 generations, but also beyond that, because we want all of our relatives to experience what we're able to experience now, and perhaps, hopefully, a better version of it if we can leave that legacy. So at this point, I've alluded to it, but when I talk about being a future ancestor, I'm specifically talking about how to be a good ancestor, because there's no doubt about it, we are all going to be ancestors in the future, whether we like it or not. But how do we be a good one, and how do we start that right now? This is a question that was posed by the creator of the polio vaccine, Jonas Salk. He says, the most important question we must ask ourselves is, are we being good ancestors? Australian philosopher Roman Krznaric has written quite a bit about being a good ancestor, and much of it actually incorporates the 7th generation philosophy and this sort of thinking long ahead past our lifespan. He talks about the perils of living for the short term, which our society really revels in. Everything is about the short term right now. I think in many ways we are operating in crisis mode. How do we attend to what's in front of us just to get by, instead of taking a step back and looking at how do we nurture ourselves and our relatives for the long term? He actually also says that we've colonized the future, that we tend to dump environmental waste and technological risk in the future, like no one is there and like no one is going to experience it. While it might be true that we might not necessarily experience it, and we're starting to now, there are trillions of unborn ancestors, future ancestors to us, who will experience this in the future. So again, it's really about creating that world that people are going to thrive in, that we love and that we have never met. And so we can all think of different things that call to our immediate attention, because the short-term mindset, it's all about speed, urgency, being efficient, immediacy, something needs a response right here, right now, being productive, a focus on immediate outcomes. And this really isn't sustainable. Dr. Krznaric refers to this as marshmallow thinking. He refers to this as something that taps into our amygdala and it keeps us hooked, that we're constantly on our phones, texting, sending emails from there, things that are just truly not sustainable for ourselves, but also if all of society embodies this sense of speed, urgency, and efficiency, something that collectively isn't good for our well-being. So healing future generations means stepping outside of the system. And if we can't step out of it, trying to find a way to sidestep it, to really focus on more of this long-term thinking, which I'll get to next. But the idea is that we cannot keep extracting. We cannot keep extracting resources from ourselves, from our relatives, and to be able to stop this extractive way of existing in the world, we have to change our thinking around it. Dr. Krasnarek actually refers to this as acorn thinking, and I just wanted to point out that acorns are indigenous to what is now the United States, and are a source of food that has sustained many indigenous nations and communities for thousands of years. So acorns are really one of our greatest ancestors too, and we have a lot to learn from them. And I think, Dr. Krasnarek is not an indigenous person, but he invokes the acorn and its teachings that we have much to learn here, that we really need to be planting seeds for the future. This means taking things off of our schedule, finding time for relaxation, for big thinking, for daydreams, for joy. This can be something like meditation, a walk in the park, going around and engaging with your environment in a more intentional way, and going through the day in a way that is much more intentional. So I reference his work because he's done considerable writing on it, though I think I try to invoke a little bit of different language. So I refer to this sort of long-term thinking or legacy thinking as an ancestor mindset. And an ancestor mindset changes our relationship with time. We're not just simply living in our past, our present, and our future, but we're living among a multitude of past, presents, and futures. So constantly what we're doing is turning into the future. If everything up until a minute ago was history, then what we're doing is constantly becoming the past and informing the future. So we're often in the moment creating the world that we want to live in. And being a future ancestor means slowing down, taking a step back, and really looking at all the different lives that are affected by ours. And again, that includes our non-human or more than human relatives. That we have to recognize this and fully take stock of this. And the idea is that when we know this, how can we promote intergenerational healing? So in healing ourselves, how can we heal our relationship with all of our relatives around us, but also those who will come after us and who will potentially never know us? So by creating these long-term, meaningful, and relational connections with our kinship networks, we can become better ancestors, but we can enrich our lives, and we can create a more sustainable living environment for everyone all around us and everyone on the earth. And to do that, we must really truly see things other than humans as kin. And I think that can be really challenging when we're just used to seeing something as existing, instead of something that we're in a relationship with, something that we're responsible for and that we have to be accountable to. So we have to really connect our bodies back to the land to ensure that our future relatives have the same or better opportunities than we do, to be able to coexist with this land in a healthy and sustainable way. And some Indigenous scholars have talked about this quite a bit, but usually not in psychology. Part of my work in this interdisciplinary and transdisciplinary space is to invite other ways of thinking that are common in other disciplines to a psychological space. So how do we live a relational reality? I think for some people, it can be really nice to think and to know that we have all of these different relatives, but how do you actually shift your mindset to engaging with them in a meaningful way? So it's really important to know that relationality is a practice. It's something that goes beyond your mindset. So to actually know something is one thing, but to engage it in practice daily is something different. So again, that means clearing our calendars to the extent we can, to get us out of this urgency, efficiency, and immediacy mindset, but be able to carve time out of our days to go and engage with the world in a way that is personally meaningful, but also meaningful for people who are not here yet, people who would look back on this with gratitude, knowing that we cared for the earth in a good way, and cared for each other also in a good way. As Dr. Neville noted, there's a lot of pain and suffering going on in this very moment. And we're in a very privileged space to be able to talk about what living a good life and what a good future looks like. And to continue that and to bolster it and to flourish this idea, we really have to work in connection with one another, knowing that we're accountable to people and that relationships, there's a give and take that's not transactional. And the same goes with the environment, that we're not just extracting resources from it, right? That we have to care and nurture for the earth as a living being, or else it will cease to exist one day. So the idea is that we all exist in relatedness with one another, that it's not just a human network of relations. It's all my relations and it's all encompassing. There can't be an other. The earth, the environment, these things that we're so used to taking and taking and taking from without giving back to, we have to stop seeing it as different from us. The earth in many ways is an extension of us. That every time when I touch my ground, I know that the earth is caring for me and that I need to walk softly and gently to care for the earth as well. So we are part of our environment. We're not separate from it. And this idea that of responsibility, I think in many, sometimes even in our human relationships with our human relatives, we forget that we're responsible for one another, that we're accountable to people, that relationships have this ebb and flow, this natural give and take, the synergy to it. And I'm just inviting all of us to think about how can we apply that to the world around us, beyond our human networks. Some psychologists have done work in this area about healing the land and by extension, healing the self. An Indigenous community in Louisiana, and I don't want to mispronounce their name, I believe it's the Homa, engaged in a 7-day intervention retracing their community's forced migration route. It involved 20 women from their tribal community, and they engaged in interviews to see what this process was like to retrace this path that their ancestors actually walked. How could people who were rewalking and retracing their ancestors' steps through something that was incredibly traumatic, how could they potentially connect to their ancestors and feel and hear their stories? How could they engage in mindfulness while being in the outdoors? Some individuals noted that they felt a renewed commitment actually to their kinship by rewalking and retracing this path, and to future generations. And some of them really noted that they felt their ancestors' love and visions for them. So something that we regard highly, regard very strongly as traumatic, like retracing a walking path or forced migration, that is traumatic. And yet people who engaged in this path found they could also find the joy in it, that they could find that their ancestors walked this path because they loved and had a vision for their future community and their future ancestors. And they included, the authors include a poem from Indigenous poet that I thought was really relevant to Indigenous joy and this idea of being a better ancestor and connecting to our surroundings. And the poem is by Indigenous poet Linda Hogan. It says, "Walking, I am listening to a deeper way. Suddenly, all my ancestors are behind me. Be still, they say. Watch and listen. You are the result of the love of thousands." Um, and I invite this idea into to grapple with this dialectic of where there's trauma collectively, that there is also love, there is also resilience and a vision for the future. That there's this idea that we are doing this for a collective future that doesn't exist yet, but I want them to. So I want to share a little bit about my own communities, forced migration and our rewalking of it. Because I know my ancestors were thinking about us and our connection to the land long before my present day community ever existed. Before my grandma and grandpa, my great-great-grandma Clara and my great-grandma Lillian, there were other ancestors. I'll never know their names, but I know that they loved me. My nation, the Tuscarora Nation, is originally from the region that is now known as North Carolina. And in 1713, after a really decisive battle, our community decided to migrate north to where we are today, which is outside of Niagara Falls. This was over 1,300 miles that my community migrated. In 2013, it was the 300th anniversary of our migration. So members of my community retraced our route by foot and water. They ran, they hiked, they biked, and they kayaked. It took 70 days and over 1,300 miles for people to travel to New York. And this wasn't necessarily an intervention. You know, this work has been written about, but it was really for the community and for the people that we have ancestors that were thinking about us and how they wanted us to still exist in this world, and made a devastating choice that would ultimately lead to a future for people that they hadn't known yet, future generations of Tuscarora people. And we know this because we know this through stories. We know this through accounts of the migration that have been passed down orally to us across generations. But we also know this through our language. This is a word that came up on the migration, which I did not participate in, but my friends and relatives did. So this word is Chwent Neagwatna Werere. What this means is that we're still stirring. It also means we're still moving about. It's an old Tuscarora phrase that our ancestors murmured on the migration, and that my relatives and my friends respoke on retracing this path. So our ancestors spoke this word so their ancestors would hear them, and we did. We are still stirring and we're still moving about so that future ancestors, people that we have never met, but whom we love, will be able to do the same. So what I want to ask and end with here is, what kind of ancestor will you be? And Dr. Harrell will talk more about, I think, specific tools for that. But it's just something for us all to think about. So thank you. Thank you for listening, Nyawa. I will turn it back over to Dr. Neville.
Thank you so much. You've given us so much to think about. You know, I am just left feeling full. I'm thrilled that we are recording this because I'm looking forward to listening and re-listening to some of the gems that you have shared with us. And I really love kind of the story, how you've interwoven your family's history and importance of ancestors with your narrative, as well as these larger theoretical kind of questions. And and encouraging us to really think about what our vision is for a collective future that doesn't exist yet, and really thinking about what does it mean for us to be a good ancestor? And that ancestor is meaning to take into consideration the good life for the future, which includes us as humans and other living beings. You've given us a lot to reflect on. Thank you so much, Dr. Fish. And I'd like to turn it to Dr. Harrell.
Thank you. Thank you. And Dr. Fish, wow. I mean, my heart was resonating, my soul was resonating with so much of what you shared, and there's just so much convergence with what I wanna present as well. So thank you. I am going to share my screen. Let's see here, get everything set. Share some. There we go. Okay. All right. And I don't know if Dr. Neville, you can give me a thumbs up if the screen is being shared successfully.
Yes, it is.
Okay, wonderful, wonderful. All right, and let me take a look at time, because me and time have a very interesting relationship. So we'll do the best we can here. So I am excited to share Sankofa theory and practice with you in the context of retrieving what we have lost as a healing balm and liberatory ground in the context of anti-Black racism. And I want to just start with the Sankofa symbols, right? So Sankofa is an Adinkra symbol. It's Sankofa is actually represented by two Adinkra symbols, and an associated African proverb. And the proverb says, "It is not wrong to go back and retrieve what has been lost or forgotten." All right, so just let that sit for a minute. It is not wrong to go back and retrieve what has been lost or forgotten. So the Sankofa symbols are symbols of retrieval, reclamation, and revival. And I'm gonna dig a little deeper into the wisdom that's embedded in these symbols. And just a little context, Adinkra are African symbols, visual symbols. They're from the Akan cultural context, but they reflect wisdom that's alive throughout Africa and the African diaspora. They're associated with proverbs and general philosophies of life, direction for daily living, and really center so many of the Adinkra symbols center community and spirituality. So I've just put a few of the symbols here. Again, just take a moment to take in their energy. Okay. So reclaiming and retrieving wisdom, cultural wisdom is a critical resource for our healing and transformation, right? So emerging from the Dagara people in West Africa, wisdom is understood as the weaving of individual persons and gifts into a community that interacts with the forces of the natural world, right? So wisdom isn't an isolated individual characteristic. It's the weaving of persons and gifts into community that interacts with the forces of the natural world. And again, just resonating so much with Dr. Fish's presentation. Right? So wisdom is reflected in the manifestation of individual purpose and gifts. We all have gifts, but it's for the purpose of the greater good. Right? So wisdom is this dynamic, emergent, evolving, integrative process of deep, personal, collective, spiritual, embodied, and experiential knowing that reflects insights, revelations, understandings of life, informs discernment, choice, meaning, action, right? In the context of relational, social, cultural, political, et cetera, right? So I wanted to start here so we can really feel the healing value of cultural wisdom. There's many specific African wisdom systems and systems of spirituality and healing. And I'm naming a few, both Indigenous African and diasporic, that extend from African wisdom here on this slide, just to give you a feel for some of those. And I imagine some of you here are familiar with some of these wisdom systems, these ways of knowing from an African context, principles of Ma'at, the Yoruba spiritual system, Ifa, Bantu Congo philosophy, Ubuntu, the Adinkra symbols, the Ngozo Saba of Kwanzaa, Pan-African Black psychology, womanist theory, Black theology of liberation, Black existentialism, etc. There's, I just a little sprinkling here. There's this reservoir of wisdom and knowledge, and there's much shared across these wisdom systems. Each one emerged in a particular cultural context, so the topography sometimes looks a little different, right? The names of concepts, but there's an underlying convergence, which I'll talk a little bit about, of all of these systems. So we're retrieving cultural wisdom for our healing, right? And healing is really involves reclamation, restoration of wholeness, health, well-being. Healing involves release and liberation from that which is toxic, dangerous, causes harm or sickness. Healing is integrative, body, mind, heart, soul, community, nature, spirit working together. Healing involves addressing the root causes of pain and suffering. And it also involves mending our wounds and soothing our pain, facilitates natural, like activates, right? Natural healing processes, right? Occurs in the context of love and compassion. Healing is communal, collective, right? Provides our foundation, right? For our optimal growth and development. So offering cultural wisdom as a source of our healing is really kind of the core of what I want to offer with Sankofa theory and practice. As Dr. Neville shared, this is kind of the center of some of the work I'm doing now. It's rooted in and inspired by cultural wisdom, belief systems, and healing traditions from Africa and the African diaspora. And it's an integrative, what I call psycho-eco-cultural, right? So those three systems all working together always, person in culture, in context, always. Right, to enhance, optimize our well-being, our resilience, our mental health. And this offering, emerges from a communal collectivistic worldview that really centers healing, transformative, and liberatory power of connection, reconnection, and interconnection. Right. So that's the kind of essence of the theory, right? The healing, transformative, and liberatory power of connection, reconnection, and interconnection. So we just the theory amplifies, kind of blows up those terms from that cultural ground, right? So connection from an African collectivist communal worldview really centers well-being and healing in terms of connection and the dynamics of connection, right? Disconnection. Dr. Wade Noble's suggests that disconnection is a big piece of what's operating in disorder among people of African descent. Right? So that Pan-African Black psychology voice informs the theory. And then reconnection, which is the message of Sankofa, the core message of Sankofa is reconnection. It is not wrong to reconnect. It is not wrong to go back and retrieve what we have lost and forgotten. Right? And then interconnection. And again, Dr. Fish spoke to my heart in her presentation. And this is really a foundational principle, and it reflects temporal interconnectedness within Sankofa wisdom. Right? And again, I'm going to get more into the deeper wisdom of retrieval and the symbols, but temporal interconnectedness, the interconnectedness of past, present, and future, right? And interconnectedness within that larger African philosophy of Ubuntu, the interconnected nature of humanity. Right. So Sankofa theory and practice offers this ecosystem, which I call the Sankofa sevens, right? I love this number 7 has a lot of meaning, that's another conversation. But I'm not going to obviously in the whatever 20 minutes I have left be able to share each aspect of the ecosystem. But I wanted to just give you the larger context, and I'm going to pull a couple of pieces out of here to kind of really talk about the healing potential of Sankofa. So some characteristics of an African-centered orientation, right? Communalism, interconnectedness, honor and reverence of elders and ancestors, an extended self, right? The person beyond the physical body, right? It's a we experience. Centrality of nature, centrality of spirituality, spirit energy, vibrational life force energy, holistic healing, right? Rhythm and harmony and balance, right? The sense of the flow, the natural cycles of life, balance within and between persons, nature, universe, spiritual phenomena. Intuition and knowing beyond the 5 senses, rituals, ceremony, celebration, expressiveness, creativity, improvisation, spontaneity, and yes, joy, right? Joy. So this is the kind of cultural ground that the intervention work springs from as well. Right. So within Sankofa theory, one of the 7s forms this acronym of Sankofa, the base, what I use the soup metaphor. So whatever practices emerge out of Sankofa theory have this base, right? This is the base of the soup. And depending on what we do, we may put different ingredients in it, right? But soulfulness, sacredness, authenticity, ancestors, nurturing, kinship, opening for guidance, revelation, illumination, freedom, liberation, flow, creativity, and then Ashe, the energy of Ashe, of manifestation, of synergy, of actualization and amplification. So again, this is kind of the base, the culture, so to speak, of this theory and the practice. So one of the characteristics of an African-centered worldview is this understanding that our wisdom, our knowing, our senses are beyond, right, the 5 senses. We come to know the world and ourselves in multiple ways. So one of those Sankofa 7s is this 7 sources and expressions of wisdom, right? And while my cultural referent is African, indigenous, and diasporic sources, there's a resonance here with many indigenous traditions, and again, resonating with much of what Dr. Fish presented. So, these 7 sources: our somatic wisdom, our emotional wisdom, our relational wisdom, our conscious wisdom, soul wisdom, intuition, our collective wisdom, communal and cultural, and then our wisdom, our spiritual, metaphysical wisdom of transcendent, ancestral, nature-based experience. And so some of the work of retrieval is retrieval and remembering and returning and reclaiming our wisdom, right? Our wisdom, all of these wisdoms, right? And sometimes that reconnection to our knowing is a really core part of practice and healing practice. So I Ubuntu was listed on that previous slide, right? And this is a real foundation: the interconnectedness, reconnection, interconnectedness. And I'm just going to highlight, and the slides will be available for you to look at more closely. But I want to highlight that last piece there. Ubuntu is recognizing the spiritness of others and the humane relations that extend from that recognition. So when we think about African wisdom, it really informs a decolonial orientation to healing, right? So this healing of interconnectedness, right? Another one of the Sankofa sevens is interconnectedness, temporal, experiential, that relational, soul to soul, soulmate kind of connectedness, right? Our humanness, our shared humanity, that interconnectedness there, right? That we are embedded in context, person, culture, community, right? The eco-universe as a source of interconnectedness, humans, nature, the cosmos, and then the as above, so below interconnectedness of the spiritual and the material realm. So these part of the work again of Sankofa, retrieving our natural interconnectedness that we get lost from, right? The knowing of our interconnectedness across all of these domains. And from an African-centered perspective, harmony is a hallmark of health and well-being, right? So again, restoring, becoming interconnected or reconnected to our interconnectedness, right? It's a realignment. It's restoring that natural harmony. So, I want to name this larger context of anti-Black racism and anti-Blackness, right? This is a big part of what we are healing from, right? And Sankofa gives us a symbol and a center, right, that really illuminates the importance of reclamation, reclaiming our humanity, reclaiming our indigenous wisdom, reclaiming our power, reclaiming each other. Because anti-Blackness is fundamentally the refusal to recognize Black humanity. So I co-authored an article, and I'm going to check here on the time. Okay, there we go. With my colleagues Earl Turner and Tama Bryant, Doctors Turner and Bryant, and this is the definition we gave in that article: anti-racism, anti-Black racism is understood as dehumanization and injustice, violence, exploitation, marginalization, and exclusion that is embedded in an ideology of white supremacy and operates systemically such that it's woven into multiple domains of life for Black persons. Right? So living in the context of anti-Black racism compromises the quality of life for Black people on just about every social indicator. Right? And going on from that article, anti-Black racism generates experiences of racism-related stress and trauma that threaten health and well-being. And it also exerts its damage through the degree to which Black persons reject Blackness and African cultural connections, internalizing messages of white superiority that are embedded into social spaces and dominant social narratives. And so anti-Black racism generates racial stress and trauma. And we really want to understand racial stress and trauma as the experience and effects of danger, threat to our safety, to our survival, to our security, right? Violence, harm, and loss that originates in racism, originates and is fueled by racism, anti-Blackness, anti-Indigenousness, coloniality, and the ideology of white supremacy. Right? So let's kind of connect the dots a little bit here. I love these two quotes. Power is the ability to define someone else's reality and get them to accept it as if it were their own. Dr. Wade Nobles. Every time I read that quote, right, it pierces. Right? Power is the ability to define someone else's reality and get them to accept it as if they were their own. And then an African proverb, when lions become historians, hunters cease to be heroes. Just let those two quotes sit with you for a moment. Right? The damage of colonialism, the damage of anti-Blackness and anti-Black racism, and the ultimate damage of oppression and coloniality is disconnection. Disconnection from humanity is what enables oppression. So then the core strategies of oppression and coloniality are disconnect, detach, dominate, destroy. And those harms are disconnection from ourselves, from our culture, from our communities. Right? I just really resonate with concepts that have been offered over time around racism and disconnection, racism and oppression as disconnection from the soul. Right? Hobson and Hobson offered soul detachment as alienation from our souls, from our connection to others, from our aliveness. Ancestor Bell Hooks offered the term soul murder, oppression's impact that can result in disconnection from and repressing of feeling, right? We get disconnected from our feeling, from our emotions, a way of managing the repeated assaults on one's humanity. Right? Eduardo Durand, as many of you familiar with, offers soul wounds. He and his colleagues speak of the spiritual, cultural, intergenerational effects of historical and collective trauma, the disruption to the natural harmony, right, of mind, body, spirit, disconnection and damage to the soul of community. And I've spoken about this idea of soul bondage, being disconnected from our freedom, our voice, our inner power, separated from a sense of ownership of ourselves and our lives, right? A decreased experience of aliveness. It's depleting. It feels like life is being sucked out of you. And that experience of being trapped, constrained, shackled, chained, bound in captivity, and the need to free ourselves from these disconnections of the soul. So again, back to the symbols. Right? Thinking about this conceptualization of racial stress and trauma, of anti-Blackness, and the core dynamic of oppression being disconnection. Right? Sankofa is the energy of reconnection, of interconnection, retrieval, reclamation, revival. Right? So disconnection, again, going back to that ecosystem of Sankofa theory and practice. I'm gonna check my time again. All right, there we go. So disconnection is really offered as the core process underlying distress and dysfunction. So these these 7 Ds really are the different ways that disconnection is expressed, right? And how we experience it, the what happened question, right? What happened? What's the nature of the disconnection, right? It helps in understanding the origins and etiology of current problems, right? So we also want to understand disconnection as efforts to adapt and cope, right? So disconnection results in disconnection, right? How distress is expressed through disconnection, right? Disconnection as reaction to disconnection. I also want to name, I don't have, we didn't have the time today, but I have, conceptualizing, the harmful effects of disconnection, but there's also healthy disconnection, right? Healthy disconnection. And we can move on. So I'm aware of time, so I want to just name these. And again, you can have the slides and kind of dive into these a little more. But the dynamics, the first one is dehumanization, right? Which is really that objectification, othering, devaluing, right? As one of the core dynamics of disconnection, so that we can, when we, those of you who do counseling or psychotherapy, what are we listening for when we hear lived experience, the stories that our clients share, and from this view, we want to really understand the nature of disconnection. So that's part of what these sevens can help us do, right? So dehumanization, detachment is being disconnected from relationship, right? Dehumanization, disconnected from the humanity and humanness of self and others. Domination, right? Coloniality, abuses of power, silencing, injustice, disconnection from power and voice, destruction, disconnection from safety and stability, adversity, etc. And the last 3, delusion, disconnection from our truth, from authenticity, from inner knowing, from wisdom, right? That confusion, internalized oppression, masking, hiding, etc. Disharmony, disconnection from wholeness, from integration, from alignment, from balance, right? Disharmony is the energy of polarization, of fragmentation. And then finally, demoralization, right? Depletion, despair, right? There's a disconnection from our joy, from our aliveness. So, going back to Sankofa, regrounding, it is not wrong to go back and retrieve what has been lost or forgotten, right? So identifying, what are these disconnections? What have we forgotten? What do we get lost from? We forget where we come from, who we come from, where we come from. We forget our roots across time and place. We forget the truth of our interconnectedness. We forget our inner light, our beauty. We forget the resources of our somatic and body experience. We become lost and disconnected from our bodies. We forget the lessons of our pain and struggles. We forget our wisdom. We forget our blessings, our gifts, what we are truly capable of. We forget our purpose, our calling. We forget our value, our worth. We forget what brings us joy, feeds our soul, and lifts our spirits. We forget that we are deserving of care, compassion, grace, and forgiveness. We forget our capacity for healing. We forget that our circumstances do not define who we are. Right? So those are among the forgettings and the harms of anti-Blackness, of anti-racism, of anti-Black racism, of coloniality. Right? So I want to spend this last couple of minutes really kind of just introducing the deep healing wisdom of Sankofa and an offering of a reconnection process, right? So, I've said a lot of this, but I wanna look at a little deeper wisdom here. The bird is turning back to retrieve an egg in that first symbol, right? So retrieval is not a neutral act, right? It's a reclaiming, right? And it's a restoration. And the egg is significant. The egg contains precious life, right? And another really important piece is the feet of the bird are facing forward, right? So it's about bringing this valued treasure from the past into the present, right? So that it can be birthed and renewed and revived and be of value for the future, right? Again, that temporal interconnectedness, past, linking of past, present, and future. Right? So retrieval is returning to a space, time, place, consciousness that's calling us. It's a coming home, right? Um, and sometimes even though there's a sense maybe where we're discovering something new, that feeling, that is often a retrieval, right? At the root, right? Because nothing is really new, right? Right? Everything comes from something, evolves from, right? And we've got to know that from to know what is. Right? The other important piece here is going back to the past isn't to live in the past, right? There's discernment involved. So I talk about going back and the return, the retrieval, right? That process of return and remembrance. Right? We're also discerning what we grieve, what we leave, what we conceive, and what we retrieve. Right. So there's this process perhaps of recognizing what no longer serves us and we leave. There's a deep grieving that is necessary, right? That grief work that we often skip over. Right? And then the revelation, what we conceive, the possibilities, the dreaming, the radical imagination of how this past can inform and feed us and fuel and nurture where we're going into the future. Right? So these 7 anchors of Sankofa wisdom are offered as kind of blowing up the nature of the meaning of the symbol, right? The inevitability of lostness and forgetting, the compassion is great and grace, because we are going to get lost, right? We live in the context of anti-Black racism, of anti-Blackness, of coloniality, of oppression, of intersectional oppression, right? So we're gonna have some lostness that occurs, and we need to meet that with compassion and grace. We need to understand part of the wisdom of Sankofa is an invitation to expand our knowledge and awareness, to return home, right? To honor, right? And bring reverence, right? To what has come before us, what and who has come before us, to ground in interconnection and rebirth, renewal into the present and into the future. So this Sankofa calling, right, is often what brings people to therapy or counseling, right? It's something inside that's whispering about this disconnection, this lostness, right? And that Sankofa calling is a call to home, right? A call to reconnect, a call to communion, right? Something needs attention in order for us to move forward. And so just inviting, right, everyone to, just kind of come make some contact with your own Sankofa callings, that deep voice that calls us into reclamation, into return, right? To retrieve, to reclaim. So the process that kind of emerges is this healing process of reconnection, this healing balm, right? This act of resistance to the pressures to suppress and deny who we are and where we come from. Right? The Sankofa reconnection process is an act of love for ourselves. The second symbol is a stylized heart. And so just offering these 7 processes of recognition, right? The first thing we've got to do is notice that we are disconnected, right? That dynamic of disconnection, of delusion, sometimes we don't even know, right? So we've got to recognize this awareness, right? And then realizing our right to what has been lost, forgotten, stolen. Right? Realizing our right to it, realizing its importance and the necessity of reclaiming. Right? The third is the return, the going back, right? Going back and really making contact with it, going back. It's a process of rooting and resourcing, re-entering experientially, which can look a lot of different ways: deep reflection, meditation, spiritual ancestral practices, imagery, symbolism, use of music, art, poetry, literature, physically returning to the land, right? Cognitively through research and learning, relearning. Right? The next part of the Sankofa experience, the Sankofa journey, is retrieval. We go back, we return, and then we bring back what was lost, forgotten, stolen, hidden. We rekindle its light. We make space for it. Remembrance, the uncovering. This is the deep process of remembrance, right? Uncovering the deeper ancestral, collective, cultural, spiritual memory. Memories of buried lived experience. This is where the grief work happens. The naming of what has been lost, right? The honoring of success, sacrifices, and the compassion for failures. Revelation and release, right? In this revisiting, this return, this remembering, things get revealed to us, emergent insights, increased awareness, life lessons, right? It's also, again, that understanding that not everything needs to come back with us. Some things we need to leave. And then finally, revitalization and renewal, right? Fully illuminating, owning what we have brought back, what we have retrieved, activating a transformed relationship with what was lost, right? Lena Horne said, it's not the load we carry, it's how we carry it, right? So can we carry things differently moving forward? Reimagining our ancestors' dreams, opening to new possibilities, right? So the Sankofa experience is movement through these processes, right? Again, an invitation to reflect on your own Sankofa experience. And I'm going to wrap this up. Where are you in your Sankofa journey? And I just want to speak to Sankofa as liberatory ground, right? And I love this quote. Did you know that birds do not land because they are tired? It is a remembrance. They know and have always known that their liberation depends on their ability to recall the ground, right? So this Sankofa process is recalling our ground in the service of our liberation. Reconnection is the ground of liberation. Reconnecting to a solid home base to which we can return and from which we can risk and explore and discover the world. Right? See it to free it. Our liberation, our forward movement depends on seeing where we've come from. Okay, so I am actually going to wrap up. I know we want to leave time for questions, and I'm just going to play a little bit, not the whole song. I was going to play the whole song, but I'm just going to play a little teeny bit of the song. So just invite you to just ground for a moment. And if you feel comfortable closing your eyes and just feel into this song. It's called I Know Where I've Been. And I'm just going to play a piece.
There's a light in the darkness, though the night is black as my skin. There's a light burning bright, showing me the way, but I know where I've been. There's a cry in the distance. It's a voice that comes from deep within. There's a cry asking why. I pray the answer's up ahead. Yeah, 'cause I know where I've been. There's a road we've been traveling, lost so many.
Okay, I'm going to wrap up there. All right.
Wow. Thank you so much, Dr. Harrell, for that incredibly powerful words of wisdom and sharing your Sankofa model. And I just am really taken aback about how much connection it is with Dr. Fish's words. It was almost as if we like sat down and coordinated it ahead of time. This theme about connection and disconnection and reconnection was interwoven throughout both of your presentations, but you just did such a beautiful job. And I love this idea about reclaiming and retrieving cultural wisdom as this critical, important part of our healing. And the questions that you raised were powerful. I was particularly like, what are we disconnected from? What are we forgetting? And then how do we reclaim these cultural wisdoms and reconnection process? And you added some really powerful ways to do that. So thank you so much. And thank you, Dr. Fish, as well. And I'm just excited to read some of the questions here. I hope you also looking at the chat where you're getting lots of love and appreciation from those who are in attendance. So I'm going to read these two interrelated questions from two of the participants here. And then I'm going to first ask Dr. Fish to kind of address them, and then Dr. Harrell, because they asked them before you went into certain pieces in your presentation, Dr. Harrell. So the first one comes from Don Henderson, who thanks you all so much for this space and this idea, like, how do we support those reconnections among young people who are deliberated, displaced, disconnected from spirit, soul? We'd love to hear some of your wisdom on the how-to. And then also G. Duran talks about, again, beautiful and powerful conversation. Your words resonates with her. And can you share some strategies for healing, reconnecting, and aligning with our ancestors? So maybe we'll start with Dr. Fish and then turn it to Dr. Harrell.
Thank you, Dr. Neville and Dr. Harrell. That was amazing. I love that our presentation just spoke to each other, totally in sync. I think for young people who are displaced and disconnected and coping with that, I often think that part of the issue has been made to be about the individual. Um, these issues like coloniality and violence and genocide that have affected the collective is very much made into an individual problem to solve. So I think for me, it's turning back into the collective and leaning into community to be able to open up pathways for youth to reconnect in really meaningful and safe ways. And knowing that there are community members who want Native youth and Indigenous youth to be there and to help them on their reconnection journey. I am in the Minneapolis-St. Paul area, which is the homelands of the Dakota people. And there are a lot of Ojibwe people here, but there's a large urban Native community here that is tribally diverse. And I'm grateful to be in a space where there is so much programming and actual resources to help people reconnect, whether it's through activities like drumming or beadwork or language. I just think that after having the opportunity to grieve, which is ongoing, and when someone is ready to reconnect to community, that there are people there that will hold them through that process. And I also think doing this work with ancestors, I speak to my ancestors every day. There's a picture of my grandma and my grandpa, and my ancestors in my house, where I stop and I give them a kiss and I ask them how they're doing. Because just because they no longer have a physical body, it doesn't mean that they're not present. And I know that we are in this very physical, corporal world, but I know that there's a thin line that separates that, and they are just on the other side of it. Still there for me. And with that, I will turn to Dr. Harrell.
Thank you, Dr. Fish. And I think, the things that came to me with the questions, you said them in many ways. So, just really, again, centering the healing power of connection and reconnection. Your example is of beadwork and, some of our cultural ways of healing that are both ancestral and communal, right? That's a powerful combination right there, putting communal and ancestral together, right? So I think, thinking about our youth who feel many of our youth who feel so disconnected, right? I think, to me, uplifting that power of connection, still our intervention models often are very individual, right? We talk to one person at a time, right? The importance of communal healing settings. One of the things that I observe within an African tradition is healing is almost always happening in ceremony, right? It's happening in community. The healing rituals and healing traditions, there's such an emphasis that we do that in community. So, increasing the opportunities for youth to connect in community across generations, right? When I was in Senegal, I went to a healing shrine, and all ages were there in ceremony together, right? And so that, I think that piece is really, really important. One of the things I've been with the question about strategies, I've been kind of playing around with. This is just one example. Chair work, right? So, kind of Gestalt origins. It's used a lot in emotion-focused therapy, but chair work, right? And thinking about how we can, who we put in the chair and who we allow to speak through us, to us, and dialogue with us, right? In that psychotherapeutic chair work space. So, you know, in terms of even an individual therapy application that tries to bring some of this wisdom in, that's one thing I've been sort of playing with as well. I'll often start sessions with um, a libation process, right? And ask clients, who is here with you today, right? Who would you like to invite to be here with you today? Oh, yeah, just that's a couple of thoughts there.
Wow, so rich. I'm just really disappointed that we have so little time, but there's two to really engage. I feel like we're just getting started with the conversation and really need another hour to just unpack and be in community with you all. But there are two questions I'd like to read, and if folks can respond briefly to either one of those, that would be great, one or both. Janice Castro, thanks you both. And notes that you both talk about, it was very interesting to hear about 7 Sankofa reconnection process and 7 generations related to ancestry. If somebody wanted to talk about that. And then Amy Reynolds also asks is like, how do we integrate this mindset into training of our students? So if you can leave us with some initial thoughts that you might have about one of those questions, that would be great. And we'll start with Dr. Harrell this time.
Yeah, so 7 has so much meaning, but 7 is a number of wholeness, of integration, of interconnectedness. There are just so many examples of that, and so I really wanted to center 7 for those symbolic reasons as well. The issue around students in our training, one of the things I'm beginning to do at where I teach is offer supervision that sort of more formally is multicultural humanistic integration, but where specific culturally grounded theories and theoretical perspectives is in actual supervision. I mean, I think it's one thing I teach a sociocultural class, and you can talk about things, but these things need to happen in supervision when people have cases to bring. So yeah, those are just a couple of brief thoughts. Yeah, I know we're almost
Thank
out of
you.
time. Yeah, Dr.
Dr.
Fish.
Fish.
Thank you. I'll just quickly say that among the Haudenosaunee Confederacy, which my tribe is a part of, it's part of oral story that we have always thought 7 generations ahead. And that's similar to other oral stories of other Indigenous communities, but perhaps not all. So that is something that has always been passed down to me through stories and teachings from my elders, my ancestors, and community members, that we're always thinking that far ahead. As for training, I think we really have to empower and embolden and just bolster up the students who are already in this mindset, because I think there are so many that are there. And I'm speaking from a position where I graduated 3 years ago. And so I think creating a space and an environment where people feel like they can be their authentic self and engage in this sort of work, and having that be part of the trainee milieu can be really powerful, because I often think that that's where our thinking around these topics gets snuffed out, is in graduate training. So letting that be a space where that's not the case, where we're actually allowed to just be. And I think that's a lot easier said than done, given the way that curricula and training and this timeline and how it works.
Mhm. Wow, you all have left us with some incredible words of wisdom too, in terms of what is this going to look like to train students. Thank you so much for these these offerings of healing. I know that you have a lot that you have left us with to think. And I love the questions that you raise about what are we doing now to be a good ancestor, and the questions of where are we at in our Sankofa journey, and really being intentional about these processes. And thank you all for stimulating thought, promoting healing, and just for being some amazing human beings. I appreciate both of you with deep gratitude. And thanks to those folks who are shared this space with us. Both presenters have agreed to share their slides, and we will send those to the presenters directly. And also you expect a follow-up email from Dr. Hammer. Thank you again. Be blessed and have a wonderful day.